That was my next question. Are you trying to tell us we're wasting our money wanting to buy one of these monoblocks? Yours, your new ones. Have you just talked us out of buying a set of those?
No.
By a resistor?
No.
Okay.
He's a hell of a salesman.
Don't look nearly as cool as a monoblock.
No way!
Look, remember a minute ago I said our emotions impact the way we hear things. So when I see those monoblocks sitting there with the tubes glowing next to the speakers, there's nothing like it. I mean, what are you kidding me, Bob? A resistor? Yeah. It's not going to be the same. Not the same as looking at those tubes, but it'll be close. It's something that's fun to do and experiment with.
Before you go away from the resistor, what about using a resistor across the terminal also, particularly on the open baffle drivers of the flats and so forth, and also dampen the peak?
That's not the right thing to do.
Okay.
A resistor across the amplifier would just take amplifier power away from the speakers. It'd get hot and burn up.
But just fairly high value, just to limit that peak of the resonance of all those drivers.
It's unnecessary.
Okay.
Especially with the platinums. There's enough air damping.
I just want to clarify that initially you said put this resistor in series with the speakers, and secondarily you said put it in series with the speakers after the woofer and before the ribbons. Is that right? You want to put it between the woofer and the ribbons so that the wire is going to come directly to the woofers and then go the resistor to the ribbon.
That's right.
So the low frequencies are not as important to change as the rest of it.
That's correct. That's right. And the rationale there is, you've heard this story. Drive your tweeters and your ribbons and your electric with a tube amp, and drive the woofers with a solid state amp. So by doing it that way, by having a resistor on one side is a solid state amplifier, drive the woofers. On the other side of that resistor is the tube amp sound.
It also makes it easier to do physically because you have screw-in terminals and you can screw your resistor in there and just put the wire in the bottom.
Right. That's really nice to have those terminals there.
When in your career did you figure this out?
When I did the stereophile challenge.
Really?
Yeah. I knew I was going to the stereophile offices to do it, so I practiced before I went. I said, hey, I can make my $500 amplifier sound like your $20,000, whatever. And I was a little nervous, to be honest with you. What if I lose? I'll have so much egg on my face. So I practiced a lot. And by the time I was on my way, I knew I'd done it. I'd successfully done it. And in the process of practicing, and then when I got there, they took me by surprise. I didn't expect them to give me a tube amp. I really thought they were giving me a solid state amp. But fortunately, I practiced on tube amps just in case. I had a little pair of 655, 14 watt per channel amps. Those are the ones I practiced on. But that's when I learned it. I learned what the difference.
Are you doing anything with that resistor other than lowering the damping factor?
What does it do? How does it do it?
Are you doing anything beyond just lowering the damping factor?
Yes. The drive signal into the amplifier will be a flat signal. The drive signal to the speaker, because of that resistor, will be not flat. It'll have peaks and dips and valleys. That's one thing. And it will also change the damping. However, it's like the opposite side of the same coin, or however that saying goes. Because in the manner it changes the frequency response, as defined by the insertion of the resistor, could be achieved other ways. But that's the simplest way. So it changes the damping and the frequency response. And it may change the crossover between the high frequency range. I think this, or I'm not sure about this, the ribbon and the mid-range. It might change the way they overlap. And the way they overlap is related to your sense of acoustic space. So if you have a loudspeaker that's a two-way system, for example, the overlap between the tweeter and the mid-range driver will define the acoustic space. In many cases, many of you have heard that 6 dB per octave sounds better than 12 or 24. That's, you've probably read that, and it's because of the overlap.
All right, before we go out and buy a whole bunch of 1.5 ohm resistors, is there any benefit to doing that if the amp is already T-modified? Or if you have a Sunfire amp and you're using, the current source.
Well, if you have a Sunfire amp, the Sunfire amp already has a 1 ohm output impedance.
Right.
So I'd add half an ohm.
And for an
Other than that-
M500T, for example, or a TFM42, just happens to be the amps that I
You know
have.
what I need to do, since I can't remember how I did, each amplifier had a different, I had a different set of thinkings, as it were, when I was designing these amplifiers over a 30-year time period. I really can't remember it. But if I get, when I'm home, if you guys would email me and tell me which amp you have, what I'll do is I'll find out. All I have to do is get the schematic. I might have to email you back and say I don't have the schematic. Do you have one? But
We could do
sooner
that.
or later, I'll get it. I'll round it all up and.
We could do that on the forum.
Pretty good bet we've got them.
Okay,
It
yeah.
would be
Who's
available
got
to
the
everybody.
manuals? Ah!
That would be Tim, TFM 75, and you're getting the entire library.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Then
And
just
he
tell
would
me
be the
which
one to give the information to also, so that way you just have to give it to one source and we can all get it.
What I would love is for you guys to go try it, each one, and then give me
I'm
the
dying to
feedback.
go home and try.
What you- I wouldn't have been talking like this if everybody didn't seem to like the tube amp that I
How close is Radio Shack?
I was afraid. What,
What time do they close?
huh?
What time? How close is Radio Shack? What time do they close?
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, they don't have 50 watt resistors.
No.
I think you'll have to mail order one away or something.
You had mentioned earlier today or last night, you touched on this a little bit, and there was nobody else around. I think you and I were talking, it might have been one other person. And you had actually said that you specifically tested yourself with the tube amplifier and the solid state amplifier, blinding yourself to see if you could hear the difference. Didn't you touched on that the other day? You actually you really tested yourself, and blindfolded you couldn't do it. But if you knew which one it was, that one always sounded better.
I think what I was talking about is I did a null test. I adjusted the amplifier, the solid state one, so that it would null against the tube one.
Right.
And so what that means is, here's the amplifiers are fed with the same audio signal. The output of the tube amplifier is varying like this, and the output of the solid state amplifier is varying like this. And if they're varying in perfect synchronism,
Right.
and if
That's
you
what it was. Right.
subtract the two, A, this is B. If you subtract the two, and it's easy to do, I just put a speaker across the two hot terminals and put your ear in it. And if you don't hear anything, that means A minus B equals 0.
Right.
Now, if A minus B equals 0, just move the B on the other side of the equal sign and get rid of the minus, and A equals B. That's just the rules of arithmetic. So by putting the null speaker between the two hot terminals of the amplifier and putting my ear to it and adjusting things so I couldn't hear it, then I knew they had to sound the same.
But looking at them,
And then I played them and listened to them, and of course they sounded the same because I knew they sounded the same. But the problem is, if you think they might not sound the same, which happens as soon as I see the tubes glowing, then they started to sound different.
Unable to divorce the humanness.
That's right. Unable to, right, Frank. Unable
How
to
do you
divorce-
match the distortion level and even order harmonics of the two?
Well, when I did the stereophile challenge, I had 12 distortion pots on each channel of the transistor one. And I
Okay.
could adjust these little pots to emulate the distortion components of the tube amp. It was a Conrad Johnson tube amp.